Good morning, Jags. This is Fahad. Today is Thursday, December 3rd. Let's get started. I have Chronicle here with me once again to present this fantastic thematic long idea. But before I dive into this one, I would like to just um, quickly mention that there's a bit of a difference as to how we categorize the thematic long ideas versus the secular long ideas, which largely fall into the investing category. If you go to the Jaguar Media website and if you look at how they're being categorized over there, a thematic long idea such as this one on Chinese Eastern Airlines that we are bringing today would be something that is more cyclical in nature based on the overall large trends that we're seeing in improving conditions in the economy and such. A secular trade idea, which falls into the bucket of investing, like the one that we issued a couple weeks ago in Eargo, symbol EAR, would fall into certain category that can independently outperform because it's a disruptor in nature. It's something new, it's something fresh, it's something different, something has is going to take a life of its own and can basically take market shares over a long period of time. So important to understand the differences here. Now, with that said, Chronicle, how are you doing?
Doing all right, Fahad. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Now, let's get started on this one. I find this one very very interesting because I can assure you that particularly in Jaguar Analytics, we have rarely ever covered any kind of international airline per se. And so this would be the first time when JAG clients will get to hear about this. And this is not something that usually pops up in a lot of the momentum traders, radars, or other research. So continuing to stay focused on what's working in Asia, you have this one, Chinese Eastern Airlines. Now, before we dive into this one, there is another Chinese airline called the Chinese Southern Airline with the symbol ZNH. Let's start off with that. Can you tell me the biggest difference between these two companies, CEA versus ZNH?
Honestly, there's not a lot of difference, and you could probably take this entire thesis and apply it to China Southern Airlines as well. They are the two largest state-owned airlines in China. The only difference is that China Southern Airlines has a bit more exposure to European flights than China Eastern Airlines, which is more domestically and Asia focused.
I see. Okay. All right. So tell me about CEA. Moving along. Your first slide talks about exactly how the pandemic has affected air travel and what you're starting to see now, 1 year into this pandemic.
Sure. So for this thematic idea, we're looking at, of course, the travel industry. Now, on the first couple pages of the attached write-up, I detail about how there's asymmetric risk reward in a lot of beaten down U.S. travel companies, depending on how one structures the trade. But for this presentation, I'm specifically focusing within China, where there's more than enough evidence for us to be able to quote unquote write off the pandemic headwinds faced by the regional travel industry there. So first off, looking at latest checks, flight passenger activity at China's major airports are now just 10% off 2019 levels. And it's been that way since August. And if we look at Shanghai's international airport specifically, traffic has dropped just 2% through November 10th, despite Golden Week already being over. And if you don't trust official Chinese data, then we can also look at checks from the International Air Transport Association, which show that at the end of Q3, Chinese airports made up the top 5 of 6 positions globally in their composite activity measure. They're also forecasting that the domestic air travel market in China will return to profitability by year end. Additionally, their report states that air passenger demand for the entire Asia Pacific region is expected to grow 50% in 2021. And then lastly, if we look at the latest airline seat capacity checks from Moody David, through November 24th, seat capacity for travel within Asia Pacific is now down only 11.9% on year, and overall capacity is down just 14.7%. So Asia is leading everybody else by a mile right now.
Yeah, and that is widely being seen, and when we go through a lot of these earnings reports from the recreational sector, and we're going to show some quotes over here from Marriott CEO and some from others, they're also talking about the same exact thing. They're seeing improvement in Asia far better and faster as we come out from this pandemic than they're seeing in most of the developed nations. So moving along, here's the slide where the Hyatt CEO and the Marriott CFO are making comments particularly about this topic.
So, looking at their Q3 earnings conference calls, we can see that, as you said, Hyatt CEO is saying that occupancies in most of Greater China, which includes Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, has now fully recovered and has continued to show strength beyond Q3. And in fact, he said that business travel is keeping up with leisure as well. Like in terms of total contribution, business travel isn't that much off. Separately, Marriott's management said that more than 90% of their hotels in Greater China have returned to positive gross operating profit as of Q3. And then lastly, Hilton's management is also saying China is leading the recovery in their business. So this is yet more evidence that normality has somewhat returned to China. Moving on to the next slide, we have even more evidence. Looking at Trip.com's earnings from a couple days ago, they're reporting that Chinese domestic air ticketing and mid to high end hotel reservations have returned to positive growth with sharp sequential inflections across all segments. And within the domestic aviation industry itself, a lot of smaller airlines that are catering exclusively to local or just regional flights, like Spring, Junyao, and China Express, they're already reporting profitable quarters in Q3. So I think it's only a matter of time before the big boys start reporting profitability as well. In fact, China Southern Airlines, which you flagged, Fahad, which is a competitor of China Eastern, they've already reported a positive net profit.
Interesting. No, just to add more to this would basically go back to the discussion we had just this morning about Las Vegas Sands, where in the presentation that the investor relations officer of Las Vegas Sands that has big presence in Macau, in the presentation yesterday, they talked about the return to normalcy in Macau happening, albeit by some measure, it may be a little bit slower than expected, but it is there. And I think that there's a real argument to be made that with vaccines now being developed by several major pharmaceutical companies and approvals taking place, not only by the FDA in the US, but also European authorities and such, the distribution of these vaccines will occur right here in this month of December, and it's going to only accelerate from here over the course of next 3 to 6 months, given the urgency. And that all of that plays nicely positively in improving confidence for business and recreational travel to bring about more and more people out back into the normal life as it was before COVID. And this company, China Eastern Airlines, serves a lot of the routes for the businesses as it's stationed the on the eastern side of the country, where Guangzhou and many of the provinces where there are major hubs for business travel and such. So very interesting view over here. Moving on to the next slide. Here is an interesting one where you make an argument that the trough was likely this first half of 2020. And from this point on, we're going to see continued improvement from here. Tell me more about this.
Sure. So we're coming to the company now. The important thing here is that roughly two-thirds of their total annual RPK is within Greater China. And as we can see from this route map, the vast majority of their international flights are within Asia Pacific. Regarding their finances now, the first half of this year was a disaster. No surprises there, because the very strict lockdowns that the Chinese government enforced in January and February. Like if you check the statistics, both hotels and flight occupancies in affected cities during the lockdowns dropped to single digits because the government there wasn't playing around. And so as a result, China Eastern Airlines reported revenue and gross profit down 57% and down 212% respectively on a year-over-year basis, basically multi-decade lows. But as we can see, because of everything that we've touched on in all the previous slides, the numbers have started to inflect as of Q3. Now, this can also be partly attributed to the fact that the company is selling all-you-can-fly promotions, where the passenger pays a one-time fee in exchange for unlimited flights. That's been one of the saving graces for a lot of Chinese airlines when they rolled it out during the trough months. But now looking ahead, one thing I'll say here is that with the Lunar New Year holidays around the corner, I think there's going to be pent up demand for even more local flights. Considering the amount of people who weren't allowed to travel for this year's celebrations because of the lockdowns in Wuhan and other cities, um, this is going to be another tailwind to look forward to in Q1 of 2021.
That's interesting. I did not know that in China you can just pay a one-time fee to basically have a package of a number of flights you can have in a year to anywhere, or unlimited flights for that matter. Never heard of that. That's something we do not have in the U.S. Would be interesting to look into that one. Moving along. Now, this is the last slide on this one, technical. Now, this is the one that is the most important piece of this presentation, in my view, because this one really highlights that if we are starting to see the recovery that we are seeing in post-pandemic world, with travel starting to come back, the number of foot traffic, the amount of foot traffic in airports is already back to 90% and such. There's no reason for this stock to still be down here. If we just go back 2 years ago in 2018, this thing was trading as in the mid 40s, and China has gone through multiple economic expansion and contraction cycles in the past 5 to 6 years. And this chart also illustrates that. We discussed this also in webinar recently, where we made the very case that back in 2014, 2015, the last cycle that we saw, Shanghai stock market rallied by 50% over the course of next, 6 quarters. Then we went through another slow period. And then in 2017, we saw a similar kind of a massive expansion phase in the economy, and stock market went up by 40 to 50% once again in 5 to 6 quarters. Could we be on another, embarking on a similar kind of patterns? And when I see this and I extend this view to a lot of the Chinese stocks that we have talked about, including the internet companies, it certainly seems to be happening, right? But could we have one of those parabolic moments coming again?
It wouldn't surprise me. So, because looking at this annotated chart, the stock recently made a failed attempt to break through the key multi-year resistance of about 2350, and right now it is making a second attempt on somewhat rising volume. And if you notice, like you said, the stock also has a history of making very fast moves during economic recoveries. And it's a similar case for China's Southern Airlines, where I think the symbol is ZNH.
Yeah.
So both these stocks have very high correlation. They would both behave the same way.
We were talking two of the largest airlines in China, CEA and ZNH. So very interesting. I think that there is a very low risk entry here within the post-pandemic world, considering where these charts are, considering the underlying improvement that we are seeing in the travel, and what these CEOs from Marriott to Hilton to Hyatt CEOs and everybody else, what they're telling us. So I think it's a low risk entry for a potential as much as 50% upside in stock over the course of next 1 to 2 years. Just play the cycle essentially. All right, folks, short and sweet this time. This will conclude it. Thank you, Chronicle, for joining. Another fantastic presentation for a thematic trade idea. Once again, everybody, please note that this presentation with the full research note write-up as well as the slide deck will be available on Jaguar Media website once this video is uploaded over there. So look for that within the next 24 to 48 hours. And after that, we will come back with more in the future. Thank you very much for joining. Thanks, Chronicle.